Thank you. I just want to start off by saying how kind of happy and kind of thrilled I am to be here. Not just at the session and the conference itself, but actually at the Oval. I've just been wandering around for like half an hour this morning, looking at all the pictures, and you get a real sense of history from the building. I was a kind of really bad cricket player when I was growing up. And I always thought, I would love to play at the Lords or the Oval or one of those. I'm absolutely thrilled that I'm actually here. Not playing cricket, but I've kind of done one kind of mini dream in itself just by being here. So yeah, I'm going to talk to you for around 35 to 40 minutes. That sounds quite a long time, but I'm sure it won't be once we get underway. And as I said, so I'm going to talk to you about kind of what I've got on the first slide. Kind of the first one is just to kind of talk about my career, who I am, how I got to where I am, and some kind of wider reflections from my work. And really, I want to try and think about kind of talking to you about some of the things I wished I would have been told when I was in your position. So I want to try and bring some of the real practical learning and practical insights from being a practical psychology individual for the past 15, 20 years. It's far longer than I thought. So yeah, as I said, it's a real honor to be here, and I actually take it as a serious responsibility, because actually there's a chance to actually change and actually influence where you want to go in your career, and that's a really serious responsibility. So I actually, as I said, I really am thrilled to be here. So I'll start initially by just talking a little bit about kind of my overall career and education, to give you a sense of where I got to and how I got to where I got to. And I'll start off with my kind of basic career trajectory that started fairly low, stayed low for a bit, then improved a lot. And so as I have on the slides, I have a variety of GCSEs and A-levels. And as I say on the slide, really nothing special. I was kind of a solid C student at GCSEs. And my A-levels were a B, a C, an E, and a U. And I don't say that with any kind of pleasure, because obviously that's not very good. I say it because I did not a similar event to this, a far smaller careers talk a couple of years ago, and someone asked me afterwards, oh, what did you get for your A-levels? Because they were doing them at the time, they were really worried about them. And as soon as I said, yeah, I got a B, a C, and an E, and a U, they went, oh my God. And you could almost see a light bulb come on in his head, in terms of, yeah, these A-levels that I'm doing now, they are important, but they're not going to define the rest of my career. And ever since I had that experience, anytime I talk to people around career development, career trajectories, I always make sure to point out how rubbish I was when I was 16, 17, 18. And say that those career scores, those A-levels, don't define who you're going to be at all. They help, but they don't define you. And so after A-levels and GCSEs, I kind of got a little bit more motivated into the topics, and that's where I did the normal undergraduate psychology, postgraduate forensic psychology degree, which led me down the forensic path that I'll talk about a lot more shortly. And then far later, I kind of dipped back into academia and did a part-time PhD in forensic psychology at the University of Birmingham, which was a mistake. Not doing the PhD, but doing it part-time. So one of my reflections that I've got right at the beginning is I tried to balance doing a full-time busy job at the Metropolitan Police at the time with a part-time PhD, which was terrible, especially when you've got kind of a family and a child on the way and life gets in the way. So it's kind of, it may be too soon for many of you, but one for the future. If you ever find yourself in a full-time position and get the itch to do a PhD and go back into academia, please go part-time. Because that's what I talk to my staff about. I've got about 6 people in my team all doing PhDs, and I've got them all to go part-time, or else it will burn them out very quickly. I kind of learned that the hard way. So that's kind of the career path. To the work path, and that's what I'm going to talk about a lot more in detail, I had 2 years in the NHS as a healthcare assistant, then moved into psychiatric intensive care, which kind of lower, medium secure services, for another 2 years as an assistant psychologist. Then moved to the Home Office as a researcher for about 5 years. And then I've been at the Metropolitan Police Service and the Mayor's Office for the last 9 years. And that's what I'm going to talk about now for the rest of this talk, kind of the career aspects, each of those in turn. and then some wild reflections, the kind of stuff that I wish I would have been told when I was in your position. So I started off after my degree as a healthcare assistant in low and medium secure psychiatric services, so forensic settings. For those that don't know, those are kind of locked psychiatric settings where individuals pose a harm to themselves or other individuals. But as a healthcare assistant, so most of my day was supporting the kind of the nursing and multidisciplinary team, supporting the staff. Yeah, I did shift work, morning, night, afternoons. I did those in a strange order. And for me, the main part of that role is really developing practical relationships with the clients. Because you don't particularly use their kind of psychological background. You're there to help the clients. You build relationships with them. You'll wake them up in the morning, you'll give them their food, you'll give them their meds, you'll send them to sleep in the evenings. In that sense, you get a really good relationship with clients. But you don't get a huge amount of kind of practical psychological experience. And one of the things I did when I was at that role that I said on the slide, and I always try and remember to talk about, is I kind of spoke to my local clinical psychologist at the unit and went, look, I've got this degree. I really want to try and get some practical psychological work. And I did voluntary experience with the clinical psychologist at the time to really help me get practical experience, which was, I'll talk about that a little bit later on as well, but that is such a good thing to try and do. Just getting practical experience, looking for psychologists, sending them letters, sending them emails, saying, I want to learn from you. The worst you're going to get is people not replying to your emails. So please, that's a really good, another tip that I'll talk about. So yeah, that's very much a first step into practical mental health. Did that for 2 years. And then got a position as an assistant psychologist in a psychiatric intensive care unit. And those are units that kind of look after kind of acutely unwell clients, on a short-term basis. They bring them in, intensive work, and then kind of move them on. And there I did 2 kind of main pieces of work when I was at that unit. One, I designed an anger management session for clients, which kind of broadly kind of behavioral, I think 12, I should read my slides, yeah, a 12-session cognitive behavioral program, which was really interesting because a lot of those units, a lot of intensive care units at the time, didn't run kind of the talking therapies. They said, oh, our clients are too disturbed, or they're too acutely unwell, we can't do this with them. And I know that because one of the other things they did in that role was a national survey of those units. So at the time when I was doing that, they were fairly new units, and no one really knew how many intensive care units there were in the country. So I was able to find out that, crikey, not many other units do anger management with their clients, which is peculiar because they're all forensic clients, and they all have that as a need. And I guess what I would say into the NHS and those who are interested in going into the kind of practical mental health side is there are lots of challenges working with kind of acutely unwell individuals, both therapeutically and emotionally. And what I found really important during those days was really effective supervision. Because you're working with clients that have done bad things, and they're very unwell at the same time, and in many ways kind of very damaged. So I often talk about kind of the role of emotional maturity when you're working in those settings, because it can be quite scary. They're locked units. People can't go out. You're working with murderers, sex offenders, and a variety of other ones, but in a therapeutic way. And it does kind of need not a special kind of individual, but you need a kind of emotional maturity to work in those settings. But it can be very, very, very rewarding. As a slight tangent, this is my danger with talks. I sometimes go off on tangents that take me way over the time limit, but I'll keep it tight. I remember one of the clients we had at the time, he came onto the unit that we had when I was the assistant psychologist. And he wore lots of makeup. This big guy, wore lots of makeup, lipstick, and the blusher, I think it's blusher, white powder. I'm not very good with makeup, but white powder on the face, lipstick. And all he said to clients, to the other patients, and to the nursing staff was, oh, I love you, I love you, I love you. That's all he said. That's all he said. For about 3 weeks, that's all he said. And for the other clients on the unit, they were going, oh, this guy's a bit weird. And he was kind of becoming a figure of fun for the other clients. The nursing staff didn't really understand why he was doing what he was doing. And in one of the sessions that we were having, he talked about when he was young, he was abused by his father. And the one thing his father always said to him whilst he was being abused was, don't worry, I love you. And that had resonated with him, and he carried that with him throughout his life. And as soon as you learn that, this individual goes from this quite peculiar individual, big guy, makeup, lipstick, I love you, bowing as we're saying it, to a really damaged individual that you can help. And when you have those kind of light bulb moments, they're incredibly powerful and incredibly rewarding. NHS. And so after about 4 years in the NHS, I then kind of jumped ship to the Home Office. And it was a complete change. And I was kind of getting a little bit restless because I was doing the anger management with kind of small groups of individuals. But I was kind of getting the itch to kind of have a wider influence, if that makes sense. And I thought, well, if I can get to the Home Office, I can do work that's national in scale. And that really appealed to me. And I got the job at the Home Office as a researcher, and I kind of worked my way up at the Home Office as a researcher. Kind of researcher, senior researcher, team leader. And the work there was completely different to what I'd experienced in the NHS, completely different to what I'd learned at university. And there it was much more about conducting practical research. It was about overseeing quality research. It was about liaising with ministers. So everything I'd learned up to that point had to be thrown out the window. Kept, but thrown out, if that makes sense. So, because in terms of when you're writing updates for ministers or you're writing government reports, that's a very different way of writing products than it is when you're writing an essay at university, for example. You have to condense, in government, you have to condense anything. Think of the largest book you can think of. You have to condense that into a couple of paragraphs because a minister doesn't have all day to listen to you. You might have, there's sometimes in the Home Office we used to call it the lift effect. You might only be with a minister for like the journey of a lift. So in that space, in that time, which might be like 10, 20 seconds, you have to convey exactly what you want. So that's a really good discipline in terms of when I was writing product, when I was writing research updates. Completely different way of working. And I did a variety of work in the Home Office, kind of national schemes on reducing reoffending. And that really appealed to me. So I figured, okay, I'm doing an evaluation of a national scheme that's trying to reduce crime. If I can help that be better, I can help crime reduction in the country. And that really appealed to me at the time. But after 5 years, once again, I was getting a little bit restless and saw the opportunity to move to the Metropolitan Police Service, as their head of research. And that's pretty much where I've been ever since, for the last 9 years. You kind of realize you're getting older when you do these talks, 9 years. So my team, kind of in the Met Police for 5 years, and I was poached by the previous mayor, or my team was poached to be moved to City Hall. So what I'm going to talk about now is kind of an amalgamation of the Met experience and the City Hall experience. So this is where I am now. Head of research at the Mayor's Office for Policing Crime. I'm assuming everyone will have seen the individual top right, probably. That's the Mayor, that's Sadiq Khan. So he can obviously the Mayor. And the Mayor sets a strategic vision for London, which includes what the Met Police do and how they try and do what they should do. And he kind of delegates lots of authority to the Deputy Mayor for Policing Crime, and that's the lady on the right, that's Sophie Linden. She's the Deputy Mayor. So he kind of delegates most of the responsibilities to her. And then bottom right, at City Hall. So that's where I'm based on a day-to-day basis. And the whole point of MOPAC is to set the direction for policing and trying to achieve a safer London, and then trying to hold the police account for making London safer. So my team, Evidence and Insight, as far as I'm aware, it's the largest dedicated civilian research unit in UK policing. I'm not aware of any other police forces that have such kind of a dedicated civilian research team. And definitely no other police and crime commissioner have what we have. So I have over 20 staff, mixture of psychologists, criminologists, crime scientists. I've even got one history student and one fine art student, as he keeps reminding me, fine art. So a really eclectic mixture of staff. As I said, based in the Met for many years, poached by MOPAC in 2014. There are 4 main areas of our work, and they're on the slide. So then for the next few slides, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about the kind of work that we do, so you can kind of get a sense of the kind of research, how we try and use that research practically. But I do a whole range of performance analytics and data visualization to kind of help people make decisions. I do a whole host of large-scale surveys. So I do 2 pan-London surveys of Londoners. to hear what Londoners think. Around 13,000 interviews with Londoners and around 13,000 interviews with victims to understand what they think about policing and crime in London. Also do a huge amount of social research and evaluation, about 15 plus evaluations on at the moment. And I do a lot of liaison with academic organisations. So currently I've got a lot of work with UCL at the moment. I've got some UCL students in my team. Now I'm doing work with a professor at UCL to set up a mini new research program all about armed policing. And the whole point of my team is to try and embed the research, embed the learning into practice. That's the most important point to me. Not just doing a piece of research, going, here you go, but here's the report. No. How do you embed it into practice? How do you make people change their behaviour, change their organisational culture based on the evidence that you have? Once again, it's another kind of responsibility that we have. This is just kind of a menu of all the different types of work and research that we do. I won't go into this in any detail particularly. The only thing I'd say on this, it's a great breadth of research and analytics, from surveys to interviews to case studies to large-scale randomized controlled trials to other tests to economic analyses to surveys to data dashboards. There's a huge amount of methodologies that I use. One thing I'd point out is that a lot of government departments at the moment don't do that much primary research. They have a lot of research staff, but their researchers contract that work out and they oversee them. I contract out the two big surveys because I've only got 20 staff and I can't be interviewing kind of 26,000 individuals. But apart from that, everything else we do is primary. We do it ourselves. And that's quite unique in terms of UK government, which is one thing I really enjoy. That's what I like. And that's what I'm trying to do that as much as I can. And and as I said, the whole point of our work is to have influence on the ground. The good thing for me is that the work that we do is completely anchored to the policing and crime plan. So that's the mayor's plan, the mayor's vision for London. So the mayor will say, I want to achieve a safer London. I want to reduce violence against women and girls. He'll set a clear direction. And then our work, my research, my analytics informs that plan, help design that plan, but then informs it. So all the work we're doing links into strategy, links into the people that are designing the initiatives on the ground to try and reduce crime. So it's not disconnected research. It's completely embedded in the organisation. I think that's a really, really important thing to remember to take away. So just doing research for research's sake, I don't want to do. The research I do is completely embedded to the mayor's vision, and we use it to make decisions to try and make London safer. And doing that from the inside, for me, is really important. So I work very closely with lots of policy colleagues, lots of police staff who are doing stuff, all the way up to the deputy mayor, and trying to embed our research into decision making. And when our work's doing its job, as I have on the slide, the main point is trying to change culture and promote organisational change, and ideally to try and make London safer. That's when we're doing our job. And one or two of the examples I have later on kind of show how we've tried to do that. I said that for me that's one of the things I hope you kind of remember from this speech or this talk that I'm doing, that embedding it in practical decision making, making people make decisions based on evidence is very good. Because often a lot of people in the police and in other departments potentially don't always make decisions based on evidence. And so it's my job to try and change and lead that conversation. In terms of kind of my broad approach to working, if you were to kind of cut me open, the kind of main themes that run through me and run through my team are on this slide. And it's, I said, when I speak to my staff, when I speak to people in the police, when I speak to the deputy mayor, I always try and talk to them around, not just doing knee-jerk analytics. Oh, crime has gone up in this borough. Let's run to that borough and do lots of analytics. I don't like that knee-jerk analytics. I was trying to understand a proper understanding of the full problem, look at the wider literature, go through that entire research journey rather than just, bit of analytics there, bit of analytics there. And I do lots of work at promoting that complete research journey. When I'm designing research or conducting research, I never just think about the research that I'm doing. It's thinking about what's the wider problem? What does the wider literature say? Who are the people that are going to be designing or delivering this scheme? How am I going to work with those guys? How am I then going to help them embed the learning? I think about the entire journey rather than just the research methodology itself. And some of the aspects I have, like being pragmatic, being proportional. I speak to people at the police around, look, you don't need to do research on all areas. We can do an evaluation, but we don't need to do an evaluation on every single thing. So I've only got 20, 23, 24 staff. So I have conversations around, when don't you need to do an evaluation, to my policy colleagues who will want to do evaluation. So being much more realistic and pragmatic with them. And then one of the bits I think are really important is the point I have around upholding research integrity. I can't stress that enough. There are some people in the police, and there are some people I've experienced in government that, well, in terms of policing, I'm going on to a future slide, but a lot of people have talked about the police around being doomed to succeed. A lot of researchers in the police will do research, but it'll always find positive results. Because people are rewarded for doing positive results, and they get promoted for doing positive findings, and they don't get rewarded for giving negative findings. And we work completely against that. There have been a few examples, and one of them I'll mention later on, where we got quite heavily attacked because we gave research findings that people didn't like. But I kind of wear that as a badge of honor for my unit. I want that, and there's actually a case at the moment that I've been involved in recently where an organization that we've done some research with doesn't like the findings that we've got because they've done some of their own analytics in a very bad way. They give a very different picture, which is really dodgy analytics that they've done. They did a piece of work where, if we look at these 10 months before and these 15 months after, like a before and after test, they're really weird time periods, we're successful. Oh yeah, but if you look at equal time periods with a control group, doesn't have much difference. So that kind of upholding research integrity is really important at delivering bad news, but it doesn't always make you popular. And that's something I'll talk about later. So I always talk about thick skins. And you kind of need a thick skin occasionally when delivering research findings aren't popular. And I've got a couple of slides now just around the police and working with the police from my kind of 5 years being in the police force. It's a wonderful place to work. But there's been lots and lots written about police culture being kind of macho, be risk averse, not always receptive to evidence, closed to outsiders. And that's kind of true, but I kind of, the biggest learning I had in the Met Police was find your friends, find your allies, find the officers that want to work with you, find the officers that want to use research and data analytics to improve their work and work with those guys. So kind of find your allies and work with those. And the other thing I learned there was change can take years and years. And one of the examples I'll talk about soon is an example of a piece of research I initially attacked quite heavily. And it was only about 3 or 4 years later that the results of that really started to bear fruit. It took a few years for people to kind of get over the negative findings to reach the learning that they got. So being aware that change can take years is a really interesting reflection. And the other thing I wanted to mention about the police is, I've got an obliquely hidden gold mine. I'm not sure what I was thinking of when I wrote that. But the point is, the police holds a huge amount of data. And as potential students or potential people that may be going on to do research later in their careers, if you're interested in policing, well actually, you don't have to be interested in policing to want to use police data. You might be interested in mental health. You might be interested in public trust or public confidence in police. The police have information on that. They capture information on who gets stopped and searched. They capture information on vulnerable young people. They capture information on offending histories. There's a huge amount of information in the police. And obviously those systems aren't always easy to access, but there are named individuals that you can talk to that can help you facilitate access to that kind of data. Maybe not at an individual level, or it gets all a bit complex with data sharing and data sharing agreements. But there's lots there. If you're interested in policing or even wider mental health work, police data is potentially a huge goldmine. Yes, it is flawed and issues with data quality, but it's an organizational record of what they know, and in that is really, really insightful information. And then the other thing I just want to mention here are, it's kind of linked to the previous lot of work on data. So I do lots of work at the moment with wider universities. And I often go to universities and go, well, these are the kind of research topics that MOPAC are interested in. And if you want to do some research, we'll help you facilitate access to some of the data I just mentioned. So I'm really interested in things like stop and search on crime, the stop and search impact on crime, about public perceptions, around encouraging people to report crime, about repeat victimization. There's lots of topics that I'm interested in. And actually, any other topics, any topic I would say on crime or justice, I'd be interested in. So it's kind of thing, if people are, later down the line, if people are doing work on crime, justice, remember police data, and remember organizations like MOPAC that have a research function that might be interested to work with you and can sometimes facilitate you doing that work. So the next bit, I want to talk about some examples of my work. Am I doing? That's fine. I want to talk about some examples of my work, and I'll go through these in different levels of detail to really try and kind of talk about some of the kind of insights I mentioned earlier. So I'm not going to go through the findings of this piece. So a few years ago, an individual was killed in police custody, and how the police restrained that individual was kind of culpable for why he was killed. And as a result of that, I did an in-depth mental health problem profile in terms of how the police understand, work with, train their officers around mental health issues. So I'm not going to go through all the findings on the slide. That's not the point that I wanted to make. The point that I wanted to make is that I used all that massive gold mine of data that I mentioned earlier and went through all of that different data sets to pull together a really rich vein of insights that we could understand. So I didn't just look at the number of calls that people make to the police. I looked at the victims who had mental health issues. I looked at the offenders that had mental health issues. I did surveys of officers around what they thought their training was like around mental health. I even looked at how often tasers were used. And when tasers were used, how often were they used on individuals with mental health? So I really went into that huge data gold mine. And the fact that around a third of individuals that were tasered had mental health issues kind of tells me a lot around how the Met or how police officers understand and work with and potentially de-escalate or don't de-escalate kind of certain situations. It really presents that kind of learning. The next two are really just examples of some of the research we've done. So we've done a number of randomized controlled trials, and they kind of generate knowledge to be the best type of research if you want to know if something works or not. And these are just here predominantly to show that you can still do randomized controlled trials. You can really kind of geek out on methodologies within police data. And the first one was a randomized controlled trial where we got the police to wear video cameras. So there were little video cameras that they could turn on and off when they kind of interact with the public. And we did that to see if that made an impact on police behaviours, but which was an absolute nightmare to do. Kind of getting individual level data on officers, that was a real challenge. It was like 3 years of really hard work. But the next one I did was really, really, really simple. So it was about 1,000 individuals, officers that were going to do some training. I just randomly allocated half of them to get a survey before, half to get a survey afterwards. And, that easy, I've got a really effective randomized control trial on police training. So they don't have to be difficult. And one of the things that I do is really try and look for opportunities to be creative in the analytics that I do. For me, that's really, really important. This one, example 4, is one I mentioned earlier around being attacked because some people didn't like our research findings. This was an evaluation of a £11 million offender management scheme about 4 or 5 years ago. And that's when the Met Police probation came together, £11 million to reduce reoffending. Unfortunately, it didn't work. And unfortunately, a lot of people that were involved in that scheme went to the ministers and told them it did work. So it really was a very unhelpful environment to be doing the research and evaluation within. And obviously, there's no impact to the scheme, which what the graph on the bottom left shows. There's no impact whatsoever in terms of offending before and after the scheme, matched a really, really good comparison group. So kind of my wider learning from that, the results weren't popular at all. We were put under a lot of pressure to report positively. I was accused of costing people their careers, which is just a ridiculous way of attacking the researcher because they don't like the results. And I saw that whole concept of getting a thick skin and delivering negative news, all that learning came from this piece of work because we were kind of pilloried for quite a period of time. And actually, there are still people in the police that don't like me because of this research, which is a shame. But the biggest learning from this was around the implementation. That scheme, that program didn't work because it wasn't implemented well. It wasn't designed effectively. It wasn't implemented effectively. They tried to hit the ground running. They didn't have the right staff in place. They didn't have the right partnerships in place. They didn't have the right IT systems in place at the beginning. So I could tell them why it didn't work. But it raises questions about how receptive they are to the kind of negative news. How receptive are they to learning? Is there a learning culture in place? And that's the kind of stuff that I continually now trying to promote when I have my conversation with policy. But that's also the one where initially it was rejected, people didn't like the findings. And then about 3 years later, a cop that got it went, oh, that research, that kind of has the answers, doesn't it? And subsequently, a lot of the findings from that scheme, it's called the Diamond Scheme, has been fed into how the Met and MOPAC manage prolific offenders. It's fed into it. It's designed it. And that's what I said at the beginning about not just thick skins, but seeing research kind of, things can take time to change. You don't always have an immediate effect. Things can take time to change, and that's the best learning from that. I'll mention this one really quickly, just because it's a really innovative piece that we tried recently that didn't work. So there's been lots written about behavioural insights and nudge. I'm not sure if many people have heard about nudge. It's not a fad, but lots of people are really interested in nudge. And I did a piece of work where I sent letters to offenders to see if, can we write to offenders? And can that change offenders' offending behaviour? And the only difference in the letters was some letters had a picture of the offender on. So obviously, if you get arrested, you get kind of a mug shot. So some letters had that picture of the offender on. Others didn't have the picture, just had their name. And so we had a couple of hundred individuals that got the letters and a few hundred individuals that didn't get any letters. So a small-scale test of innovation. But we got really messy results. So some offenders offended quicker. Some offenders offended less. Some offenders were delayed a little bit. Some offenders offended away from their home location. So really messy findings. But the point was, it was trying to be innovative, it was trying to be creative in kind of the methodologies, but also linking the key crime issues that we're facing. And then I think this will be my last example. And this is just really touching on the kind of organizational learning and trying to change organizations that I mentioned at the beginning. So the previous mayor, when I first joined and we were kind of poached, had a number of targets for the police force. So in the previous mayor's mind, success for the police in London meant reducing certain crime types by 20%. That's 7 crime types that the police had to address. There were 7 high-volume crime types. And everyone had to do those 7 crime types. Even if you didn't have them as a problem in your local area, you had to do them. And they had another target around public confidence. Has to improve by 20%. In terms of crime and policing, they were the only targets that the mayor had. And when the new mayor came in, I was kind of tasked with, look, how can we conceptualize success for the police force going forward? And one thing I wanted to do was, try and bring that kind of evidence-based, richer conversation in. I wanted to go away from targets. I wanted to bring, because the fact that people were looking at 7 crime types, they weren't looking at high harm, they weren't looking at repeat victimization, they were looking at robbery, burglary, certain types of violence. That's all they were looking at. They were missing lots of other vulnerable groups that they weren't dealing with. So I really wanted to move beyond crime. I wanted to bring in high harm. I wanted to bring in victim experience and public perceptions. And that's what I was able to do, going away from rigid crime targets to a much richer conversation. So, I could easily talk, and I actually have talked about this slide for days before, but I won't. But essentially what we were able to do is get the police focusing on high harm crime, but in that get them talking about repeat victimization. That's the main measure for us going forward, not a target coming down, 20% target of crime coming down on certain crime types. Repeat victimization, especially around high harm victims. I got local areas to select their own crime priorities that they wanted to address, but based on data. I pulled in kind of victim experience, victim satisfaction, public perceptions towards the police, part of the journey. So we now hold the Met accountable to what the victims think and what Londoners think of the police. I get that information from the large surveys that I do. So it's really an example of really trying to change the conversation and be much more sophisticated in the conversations we're having with the police. And that's the kind of the work that I'm kind of proudest of. And if someone would have told me a few years ago that the biggest influence I would have been having is with this kind of performance discussion, I'd have laughed and get out of it. I'm a psychologist. I want to do my psychological experiments and tests. But this is the stuff that's given us the biggest victory. Because we're getting the police to think differently about what success looks like. It's not a number going down on a chart, we hit 20%. It's protecting the vulnerable. It's repeat victimization. And then really, just kind of wrapping up in the next few minutes, I want to say a little bit more about my work and my role. That horrific picture at the top is kind of my typical working week. I thought that's a snapshot from my calendar for my typical working week. And what I generally do is have lots of meetings. My role feels like meetings all the time. We've got obviously 23 staff, 90-odd research projects going on, lots of stakeholders, internal, external. My work, my role is pretty much meetings and hundreds of emails every day. It's bonkers when I reflect on how many meetings and emails I get. But then it's lots of juggling plates, stakeholder management, training, writing reports, project oversight, project management, staff training, supervision, all of that stuff. But really trying to embed all these learnings into the business as normal. The things I really like about my role, I love working with the police and that access to the goldmine of data. That is such an untapped resource that people, academics, psychologists, wider individuals should be using more. They don't always know about it, and that's the problem. I love the fact that I'm kind of doing evidence-based policing, evidence-based policy making, because lots of people at the moment are talking about evidence-based policing. It's a big term, it's got a lot of momentum with cops and officers and organizations like the College of Policing. So it's a really good time to be a psychologist, be a researcher within the police. And I really like the kind of next to bottom around, I like the fact that I get to raise questions that can challenge our organization, that can challenge how we do things, that ultimately, all going well, can try and lead to benefits and improvements for London and for Londoners. I like that. I love that kind of level of influence that we have. And I think my next to last slide is just some wider tips. I mean, when people ask me, oh, how, what kind of people do you recruit to the unit? And I'll say, well, I sometimes look for well-rounded research skills and kind of underpinning in psychological methodologies and that kind of stuff. But then I kind of reflect, but I can kind of train most of that stuff. I can train people to do in research methodology. I can train people in stats. The things I look for far more in my staff is everything else on that list. The inquisitive, the drive, the research integrity, the thick skin, the common sense, believing in yourself. Those things for me, those personality characteristics are far more important than can someone do a stats test. I can train the stats test. I can't always train the common sense, the inquisitive nature, the thick skin. I can't train that stuff. So that's the stuff I really look for. And I mentioned again the seeking voluntary experience. That is so good. Something I valued so much when I was doing my healthcare assistant work. Just talking to the local clinical psychologist and look, can I help you? I've got a degree, I want to try and help. So, if you're interested in psychology, BPS website, find a psychologist, search for someone that's got a broad area that you're interested in, just write to them. Worst that will happen is they won't respond to your email. In that case, it's their loss. Because when I'm looking at applications for people that want to work for me, and someone said, if someone's got equal degrees, and one person's got, and I've got voluntary experience with this organization, this is what I learned, and someone doesn't, I'm going for the person with voluntary experience all the time, and that kind of practical experience. And then the last thing that I would say, just kind of final reflections, is that I'm really proud of a lot of the work we do and a lot of the work that my team do. And it's not perfect, but at City Hall, we're kind of working with the motivated majority. When I was with the police, there were lots of discussions. How can we get cops to be evidence-based? They weren't always receptive. At City Hall, they're completely receptive. Sometimes they're too naive, evaluations and everything. But I love the fact that we're able to embed evidence and research and learning and psychological theories to help people make decisions, to make things better. And, you know, we've had a fair amount of victories and losses, and I think that's really important to reflect upon. But, you know, it is a genuine influence, and I love the fact that we've got that genuine influence on London, on decision-making, on the police. That's something I didn't think I would have had 10, 15 years ago when I started my career. I value that so much in my research. Then the next thing is just to say good luck to you on each of your careers going forward. But thank you.